The Galactic Council prided itself on its wisdom. It had united over 100 star systems, brought peace to ancient enemies, and written laws that stretched across galaxies. Civilizations that once fought for survival now thrived under its rule. Worlds that once burned with war now glittered with cities and trade. But the Council had also grown arrogant. It believed it understood every threat, every species, every story worth remembering. And in that arrogance it made a mistake, a small one at the time, so small it barely mattered. A mistake called humanity. Centuries ago, humans had been a minor species from a blue planet on the edge of the Orion Arm. They were ambitious, yes, explorers, colonizers, fighters, but they were also chaotic, unpredictable, and stubborn. They clashed with neighbors. They expanded too quickly. They refused to follow the Council's codes. And when they defied a trade embargo and sparked a border war, the Council acted without hesitation. It was swift and brutal. Human colonies were bombed. Their fleets were annihilated. Their homeworld, Earth, was scorched from orbit after a final, desperate stand. The few survivors scattered into the void, hunted and forgotten. Within decades, humanity disappeared from the star maps. And so the Council marked them as extinct. A line of text in an archive, a cautionary tale for ambitious young civilizations, and then they moved on. 200 years passed. The Council flourished. Empires rose under its flag. Trade flowed between systems. Even war became rare. The galaxy, for all its conflicts and differences, had learned to fear and respect the power of unity. But something strange began to happen. Reports came in from deep space patrols, star systems found stripped of resources. Mining colonies gone silent. Entire research stations vanished, leaving behind only twisted wreckage. At first, the Council blamed pirates, then rival species, then rogue artificial intelligences, but nothing explained the precision, the silence, the terrifying speed. Fleets were disappearing in hours as if swallowed by the dark. And then came the first message. It was a single transmission, received on every known frequency, written in every known language. We remember. It lasted 3 seconds. No origin, no trace, but it was enough to freeze the blood of every delegate in the Council chamber. They had heard those words before 2 centuries ago, shouted by the last human admiral before Earth burned. Panic rippled through the political halls. Emergency meetings stretched into endless nights. The word human was spoken again, a word most species had never even heard. Experts were brought in to study ancient records. Historians dug up dusty archives, and slowly a terrible picture began to emerge. Humanity had not died, they had fled, and they had been building in the dark. In the centuries since their exile, humanity had become something else, something older, harder, colder. They had survived without planets, without allies, without trade. They had learned to live on asteroid bases, on rogue planets in the empty void between stars. They had turned scavenging into science, salvage into art, survival into religion. And now they were returning. The first fleet appeared on the edge of Council space. It was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, black ships, jagged and silent with no markings, no lights. They did not respond to hails. They did not broadcast identities. They drifted toward the nearest colony like a dark tide. Council patrol ships attempted contact. They were ignored. A warning shot was fired. The black ships responded not with words but with fire. The colony was gone in minutes. Word spread like wildfire. Border worlds armed themselves. Fleets were mobilized. But the black ships kept coming, not in hundreds but in thousands. And behind them came more messages, each colder than the last. We remember Earth. We remember the flames. We remember you. In the heart of the Council chamber, the High Speaker stood before the Assembly, his voice trembling for the first time in centuries. We believed them gone, he said, his words echoing through the vast hall. We believed their anger would die with them, but humanity does not forget, and it does not forgive. Delegates shouted over one another, demands for peace, calls for war, cries of fear. But none of it mattered now. The storm had already begun. Somewhere far beyond the reach of Council fleets, human ships were gathering. Their weapons were primed. Their engines burned with fury older than memory, and their mission was simple. Not conquest, not negotiation. The Galactic Council had not felt fear in centuries. Empires had risen and fallen, rebellions had sparked and died, but always the Council remained untouchable. Its fleets spanned light years. Its laws reached every corner of the galaxy. No species, no matter how aggressive, had ever dared to stand against it for long. But that was before the humans returned. Now the galaxy's most powerful alliance was gripped by something it did not understand: doubt. In the capital city of Vareth Prime, the High Chamber buzzed with panic. News of destroyed colonies and vanished fleets spread faster than light. Delegates shouted over each other, pointing fingers and demanding answers. Fear had turned them from rulers into frightened children. "They were wiped out," roared Councillor Thriel of the Kazan Empire. "We destroyed them centuries ago. This is impossible." "It's not impossible," hissed the Val ambassador, his scaled skin twitching. "It's vengeance." The High Speaker rose from his seat, silencing the chaos. "We will not panic. Humanity is small compared to the might of the Council. They cannot stand against all of us." But deep down, even he didn't believe his own words. Across the stars, the Council began to prepare for war. Entire fleets were mobilized. Spaceports worked day and night building new warships. Scientists rushed to design weapons that could counter the mysterious human technology. Every border world was armed to the teeth, every patrol on high alert. Yet the enemy did not come. Weeks passed, then months. The fleets grew restless. Many began to believe humanity had fled again, hiding in the darkness from the power they could not match. But then, without warning, the first wave arrived. It started at the edge of the Zorath sector, a quiet mining region far from the heart of Council space. A sensor station picked up a faint signal, then another, then thousands. Before anyone could react, an armada of black ships dropped out of hyperspace. They moved like a storm, silent, precise, unstoppable. The Council fleet stationed there rushed to intercept. Over 200 battleships formed a defensive wall, ready to crush the intruders. The battle lasted exactly 19 minutes. The human ships were smaller and fewer, but they fought with terrifying efficiency. Their weapons cut through shields like paper. Their ships moved with impossible speed, weaving through enemy fire as if they could predict it. And when the last Council battleship exploded, the humans did not occupy the system. They simply turned their weapons on the mining colonies and wiped them from existence. They left behind no survivors, no messages, no demands. Only a single transmission repeated across the comm channels. "Justice is coming." The attack sent shockwaves across the galaxy. If the Council had been nervous before, now they were terrified. Systems near the border began to evacuate. Civilian traffic ground to a halt. Trade routes were abandoned. And still, humanity advanced, striking deep into Council space and vanishing before reinforcements arrived. On one world, they destroyed a fleet shipyard that had stood for 500 years. On another, they targeted a communications hub so vital that half the galaxy went silent overnight. And every time, they left the same message: "We remember Earth. We remember the flames. We remember you." In the war room on Vareth Prime, the Council's top generals studied the patterns. They had never seen a strategy like this. Humanity wasn't fighting for territory. They weren't trying to negotiate. They weren't even trying to win in the traditional sense. They were dismantling the galaxy piece by piece, burning the Council's power away until nothing remained. "They fight like ghosts," whispered Admiral Senra, staring at the holographic map. "We can't track them, we can't predict them. It's like they're always one step ahead." "They've had 200 years to prepare," the High Speaker replied grimly. "They know our tactics, they know our technology, and they know our weaknesses." "But what do they want?" another admiral asked. The room fell silent. No one had an answer. Far beyond their reach, aboard the flagship Remembrance, Admiral Alina Reyes watched the stars pass by. Her fleet had just completed another strike, a vital fuel station gone in flames. She stood at the viewport, silent and expressionless. Beside her, a young officer hesitated. "Admiral, the Council is calling for peace talks. Should we respond?" Reyes didn't look at him. "No. But they want to negotiate." She finally turned her gaze to the young man, her eyes cold and distant. "Did they negotiate when they burned our home? Did they negotiate when they erased our children from history?" The officer lowered his head. "No, Admiral." "Then we will not negotiate." Reyes turned back to the stars. "We are not diplomats, we are not conquerors, we are justice, and justice does not compromise." And so the storm continued. The galaxy's greatest empire found itself powerless against a species it had once called primitive. And with every battle, humanity grew closer to its ultimate goal, not victory, not conquest, but total destruction of those who had once tried to erase them. The Council had believed humanity was gone. Now they wished they had been right. The galaxy had never seen a war like this. Battles were usually fought for resources, for power, or for territory. But humanity fought for none of those things. They fought for memory, for the ghosts of their past, for the screams of their dead, for the ashes of Earth. And they were winning. By the time the second year of the war began, more than 100 Council worlds had fallen. Entire fleets had been wiped from the stars. Shipyards, research stations, fuel depots, all destroyed. But this was only the beginning. Humanity was preparing for something bigger, a strike that would shake the galaxy to its core. In the command hall of Vareth Prime, the mood was grim. Admirals and politicians sat around a vast holographic table, watching red lines spread across the map, human fleets advancing deeper and deeper into Council territory. Entire sectors had gone dark. Communications were unreliable. Trade was collapsing. "They're moving faster than we can respond," said Admiral Tharing, his voice heavy. "Every time we form a defense line, they slip around it. Every time we strike back, they vanish." "Then we must concentrate our power," snapped Counselor Yes. "They cannot stand against the full might of the Council." "They already have," Tharing replied bitterly, "and they keep coming." The High Speaker stood slowly, his old hands trembling as they rested on the table. "We cannot allow them to reach the core worlds. If they take this system," he paused, his voice breaking slightly, "the Council will fall." No one argued. They all knew it was true. Meanwhile, far beyond Council space, the Remembrance Fleet was preparing for its most dangerous mission, yet Operation Black Dawn. Admiral Elena Reyes stood before her officers, a cold fire in her eyes. "We are not striking a colony," she said. "We are not destroying a fleet. We are going for the heart." A murmur spread through the room. Everyone knew what she meant. The Citadel, the Council's primary military command center. It was the most heavily guarded structure in the galaxy, protected by planetary shields, orbital defense platforms, and an armada of ships. "It will be suicide," said one officer. "No," Reyes replied. "It will be justice." The plan was simple in theory, impossible in execution. A diversionary fleet would attack the outer defense lines, drawing the Council's navy away. Then the main force, led by Reyes herself, would strike directly at the Citadel. Their goal was not occupation. It was annihilation. 3 weeks later, the sky above the Citadel burned. The first alarms sounded at dawn. Sensor stations detected hundreds of unidentified warp signatures. Within minutes, thousands of human warships appeared in orbit, their black hulls glinting like the void itself. Council fleets scrambled to respond. Hundreds of battleships roared into formation. But the humans were already moving. Massive rail cannons opened fire, tearing through orbital platforms. Swarms of autonomous drones slipped past defenses, striking power grids and shield generators. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. For every human ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. For every defense the Council raised, humanity had an answer. It was not a fight. It was a storm, relentless and unstoppable. On the surface, chaos reigned. Civilians screamed as the skies turned red with fire. Buildings crumbled under orbital bombardment. Shield domes collapsed one after another. The once-proud Citadel, a monument to centuries of power, shook under the fury of humanity's wrath. Admiral Tharing watched from the command tower, his heart sinking with every report. "They're breaching our outer layers. Sector 4 is gone. We've lost control of the orbital fleet." "How many ships?" Tharing demanded. "Too many to count." He stared out the window as explosions lit the horizon. "This is the end," he whispered. Back aboard the Remembrance, Admiral Reyes watched the chaos unfold with cold satisfaction. "Fire the spear," she ordered. A colossal weapon, a massive kinetic rod accelerated to near-light speed, launched from the flagship. It pierced the planet's atmosphere like a blade through flesh. Moments later, it struck the Citadel. The shockwave leveled an entire continent. The ground shook. The command structure that had ruled the galaxy for millennia crumbled into dust. The Council's heart was gone. In the aftermath, silence fell. The remaining Council fleets retreated. Worlds that had once sworn loyalty now declared neutrality or independence. the illusion of unstoppable power was broken. Everywhere, people whispered the same words: the humans did it. In a single strike, humanity had done what no empire, no rebellion, no coalition had ever accomplished. They had shattered the unshakable foundation of galactic rule. And yet, for Admiral Reyes, it wasn't enough. As she looked at the ruined citadel on the view screen, her voice was soft and distant. "This is only the beginning," she said. "They burned our home, now we will burn theirs." Her officers stood in silence, understanding the weight of her words. Humanity would not stop, not until the Council's power was reduced to ashes, not until every world that had turned its back on Earth had paid in blood. The galaxy was beginning to realize the truth. Humanity was not here to conquer. They were here to end the age of arrogance, and no one could stop them now. The destruction of the Citadel was not just a military defeat, it was a wound to the galaxy's soul. For thousands of years, the Citadel had stood as a symbol of order and unity. Its fall sent a message far louder than any declaration of war. The Council was no longer invincible. Every corner of known space felt the tremors. Trade routes collapsed overnight. Planets that had sworn loyalty to the Council declared independence. Border systems shut their gates. Entire fleets deserted. The once mighty alliance of species that had ruled for centuries was breaking apart like glass under a hammer. And humanity was still advancing. On the capital world of Vareth Prime, panic turned into chaos. The government struggled to maintain control as riots erupted in the streets. Citizens fled to remote colonies, believing they would be safer far from the conflict. Politicians who had once spoken with arrogance now whispered in fear behind closed doors. "We underestimated them," admitted Councillor Yes, his voice trembling during an emergency session. "We thought they were scattered, broken, forgotten, but they are stronger than we ever imagined." "They are not stronger," hissed another delegate. "They are angrier, and anger gives them power." The High Speaker slammed his fist on the table. "Then we must do what we have never done before. We must unite every fleet, every soldier, every weapon, and crush them before they destroy us all." But deep down, even he knew it might already be too late. While the Council debated and panicked, humanity pushed deeper into their space. They no longer targeted only strategic locations. Now they attacked communication relays, civilian supply lines, and even cultural landmarks. The message was clear: this was not just war, it was revenge. On the world of Gathron, humanity unleashed a storm that blotted out the skies. Thousands died before a single distress signal could be sent. On the colony of Tareth, they vaporized orbital platforms and left the surface untouched, a silent warning carved into the stars. "We can destroy you whenever we choose." And then something unexpected happened. Species that had once served the Council, some of them former enemies of humanity, began to rise up. Inspired by Earth's vengeance, they revolted against their overseers. Uprisings erupted on 20 planets. Council fleets had to be pulled away from the front lines to deal with rebellions behind them. The galaxy was unraveling, and humanity was pulling at every thread. Admiral Elena Reyes stood in the war room aboard the Remembrance, watching as holographic maps lit up with red planets that had fallen, fleets that had been destroyed, and systems now in chaos. "They're crumbling faster than we expected," said Commander Hale, her second-in-command. Reyes nodded but did not smile. "Destruction is easy. What comes after is the real challenge." "Do you think they'll surrender?" Hale asked. "No," Reyes said quietly. "Not yet. Pride will hold them together longer than logic." She stared at the map, her jaw tightening. "But pride will not save them." The Council's desperation grew. They began building a weapon, a superweapon that, in their eyes, could end the war. It was called the Sunlance, a massive orbital cannon designed to destroy entire fleets in a single shot. Billions of credits and thousands of lives were poured into its construction. But spies hidden within the Council reported everything back to the humans. Before the Sunlance could be completed, a strike team infiltrated the system. Saboteurs detonated charges deep within the weapon's structure, causing a catastrophic chain reaction. The explosion destroyed not only the Sunlance but also the shipyard and 3 neighboring space stations. The Council's last hope was gone before it could even fire a shot. The galaxy was in ruins. Worlds once proud of their technology now begged for mercy. Planets that had mocked Earth's primitive ways now prayed for their fleets to pass them by. Even the Council's inner circle, the most powerful and untouchable beings in the galaxy, had begun to whisper the unthinkable: surrender. And yet humanity offered no terms, no conditions, no peace talks. Their silence was worse than any threat. On a small, ruined world, once a Council stronghold, Admiral Reyes walked through the ashes. Cities that had stood for millennia were now nothing but dust. Statues that once celebrated the Council's power lay broken on the ground. Beside her, Commander Hale watched silently. "Was it worth it?" he asked. "All of this?" Reyes paused, the wind tugging at her coat. "Was Earth worth saving?" she asked softly. "Were our children worth avenging?" Hale said nothing. There was no answer he could give. Reyes looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Council was still clinging to power, but their grip was slipping, and when it broke, nothing would remain. "Justice," she whispered, "is never cheap." The galaxy trembled as humanity continued its march, not as conquerors, but as executioners. They had been erased from history. Now they were writing their name across the stars, in fire, in ruin, and in memory. And the Council, once the rulers of everything, could do nothing but watch as the universe they built collapsed piece by piece. The galaxy was bleeding. Everywhere the Council had once ruled, there was chaos. Their fleets were scattered. Their cities lay in ruins. Entire civilizations that had once bowed to their power now stood against them, inspired by humanity's relentless fury. And yet the Council was not ready to die. Not yet. In a hidden chamber deep beneath the ruins of Varath Prime, the remaining leaders gathered. They were shadows of their former selves, tired, frightened, and desperate. Gone were the days of arrogant speeches and proud boasts. Now their words were whispered prayers of survival. "We cannot win this war," admitted Admiral Tharine, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights. "But perhaps we can still end it." The High Speaker looked up from the holographic map. "How?" "We strike at their heart," Tharine said. "We find their fleet, their command, and we destroy it. If we can kill their leaders, perhaps the rest will falter." "It is madness," hissed Counselor Yes. "We have lost every major battle, our fleets are shattered." "Madness," Tharine replied coldly, "is doing nothing and waiting to die." The room fell silent. They all knew he was right. Humanity was unstoppable, not because of their numbers, but because of their will. The only hope left was to break that will. Thus began Operation Eclipse, a desperate plan born of fear and hopelessness. Across what remained of Council space, ships were recalled. Every vessel that could still fly was gathered, thousands of them, old and new, damaged and repaired. It was the largest fleet assembled since the fall of Earth. Their mission: hunt down Admiral Alina Reyes and her flagship, the Remembrance, destroy the human command corps, cut off the head of the beast. It was a plan forged in desperation, and desperate plans can change the course of history. Far beyond the Council's borders, humanity was preparing for its final campaign. Admiral Reyes stood in the observation deck of the Remembrance, watching the stars pass by. The war was nearly won. The Council had no strongholds left. Most of their fleets had surrendered or fled. And yet she felt no joy. "Something's coming," she murmured. Commander Hale turned to her. "We've crushed their armies, their fleets are scattered. What could they possibly throw at us now?" Reyes shook her head. "Desperation makes monsters of even the weak. They will not surrender quietly." Her instincts were right. The trap was set at the edge of the Corvan Nebula, a vast region of swirling gases and hidden gravitational currents. Humanity's fleet moved through the sector unaware, searching for the remnants of Council resistance. Then it happened. Thousands of ships appeared from hyperspace in a sudden, terrifying wave. The stars themselves seemed to vanish behind the sheer size of the enemy fleet. Battleships, carriers, destroyers, everything the Council had left, all aimed at one target: humanity's heart. "They're here," Reyes whispered. Admiral and officer shouted. "Multiple contacts, thousands, we're surrounded." "Good," she replied, her voice cold and steady. "Let them come." The battle that followed would be remembered for centuries. The Battle of Corvan was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Lasers carved through the void like fire. Capital ships collided in massive explosions. Fighters swarmed around massive carriers in deadly dances of death. The Council's plan was simple: overwhelm humanity with numbers and brute force. And for a time it worked. Human ships fell by the dozens. The Remembrance itself took heavy damage, its shields flickering under relentless fire. But humanity did not break. They had fought worse odds before. They had faced extinction and survived, and they had learned that will was stronger than metal. "Focus all fire on their command ships," Reyes ordered. One by one, the Council's flagships exploded. Their formations began to crumble, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was their last chance. In the middle of the chaos, Admiral Tharine stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as ship after ship was torn apart. "We can still win," he shouted. "We must." But his crew was silent. They had seen the truth. Humanity was not fighting to win. They were fighting to finish. At that moment, a massive blast from the Remembrance struck Tharine's ship. The hull split apart, alarms screamed, and fire consumed the bridge. As the darkness closed in, Tharine whispered his final words. "We should have left them alone." Hours later, the battle was over. The Council's fleet was gone, obliterated. What had been their final gamble ended in total failure. Humanity's losses were heavy, but their will remained unbroken. The war was nearly over. On the damaged bridge of the Remembrance, Admiral Reyes stood among the wreckage. Sparks fell from the ceiling, and the floor trembled beneath her boots. She looked out into the stars, a field of drifting debris where once a mighty armada had stood. "They threw everything they had," Commander Hale said quietly. "And it wasn't enough," Reyes replied. "It was never enough." In that moment, the galaxy understood something it had ignored for centuries. Humanity was not unstoppable because of its weapons or ships. It was unstoppable because it refused to die. The Council's last hope had been shattered, and now nothing stood between humanity and its final act of vengeance. The end was coming, and no star would shine bright enough to hide from it. The stars were quiet now. Where once mighty fleets clashed and worlds burned, only drifting wreckage remained. The Council's armies were shattered, their final gamble crushed. Humanity stood undefeated, but victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like silence. And silence, Admiral Alina Reyes knew, could be heavier than war. The Remembrance floated through the debris field of the Battle of Corvan. Everywhere she looked, there were broken ships, human and Council alike, drifting lifeless in the cold void. Some still burned faintly, small flames struggling to survive in the vacuum. It was over, and yet it was. "Status report," Reyes said quietly. "Enemy fleet destroyed," Commander Hale replied. "Less than 10% escaped, but," he hesitated. "We lost thousands, half our carriers are gone, many of our ships won't make it home." Reyes nodded without expression. She had known the cost would be high. She had accepted it before the first shot was fired, but hearing the numbers still twisted something deep inside her chest. "Prepare the fleet," she ordered. "We move on the core." The core, the ancient heart of the Galactic Council, was more than a place. It was the center of their power, their culture, their pride. It was where they had declared humanity's extinction centuries ago. And now, humanity was coming back not to negotiate, not to rebuild, but to finish what had begun with Earth's burning skis. The journey there was long and bitter. Every world they passed showed the scars of war, cities reduced to ash, abandoned space stations spinning in silence, desperate refugees fleeing into the unknown. Some worlds hailed the human fleet as liberators, others cursed them as monsters, and perhaps Reyes thought both were true. She had never lied to herself about what they were doing. This was not a war for peace. It was a war for memory, and memory was a sharp blade. In the Council's last stronghold, the remaining leaders gathered in panic. Their fleets were gone. Their armies were broken. Even their people had turned against them. Still, they refused to surrender. "They mean to destroy us completely," rasped the High Speaker. "We must defend what remains." "With what?" Counselor Yes shouted. "We have no fleets left." "Then we fight with what we do have," the Speaker replied. "We will not beg for mercy." But deep down, they knew humanity would not offer any. Mercy was not part of their mission. The human fleet arrived on the edge of the core 3 weeks later. It was the largest armada humanity had ever assembled, thousands of warships, dreadnoughts, carriers, and Black Ops vessels. Their formation blotted out the stars. It was not an army. It was an executioner's blade. The Council launched everything they had left, old warships, hastily repaired cruisers, orbital defenses built centuries ago. But they were no match. The battle was over before it began. Human rail cannons shattered the planetary shields. Drone swarms tore through defense lines. Supercarriers unleashed kinetic strikes that split moons apart. Every resistance was crushed beneath the weight of 2 centuries of hatred. And still, humanity pushed forward, toward the planet where the Council had once passed judgment on Earth. On the surface, panic consumed the streets. Civilians ran for shelters. Politicians fled to bunkers. Even soldiers dropped their weapons and begged for mercy. But humanity did not land troops. They did not take prisoners. They orbited above like silent gods and rained fire from the heavens. The capital fell in hours. When the bombardment stopped, nothing remained of the Council's proudest city. The great towers that once touched the sky were now dust. The chamber where humanity had been condemned was a crater, and above it all, the remembrance hovered in silence. Commander Hale stood beside Reyes on the bridge, his face pale. "It's done," he said. "The Council is gone." Reyes didn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on the scarred planet below. "No," she said quietly, "not yet." The cost of their vengeance was everywhere. Reports flooded in from across the fleet, thousands dead, countless ships destroyed, entire worlds ruined. Even humanity's own colonies were struggling under the weight of war. Many soldiers wept quietly in the halls, mourning friends and family lost along the way. Reyes walked through the ship later that night, her steps echoing in the silence. She saw faces, tired, haunted, victorious, but hollow. They had won, but at what price? In a quiet observation room, she stared out at the broken world below. Her reflection looked older, harder. Was this justice, she asked herself, or had vengeance consumed everything they once were? She didn't know the answer. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Back on Earth's ruins, a planet long dead and forgotten, a human probe transmitted a final message to the stars. It was simple, it was final. "We were ashes, now you are too." Across the galaxy, the war was effectively over. The Council's fleets were gone, their cities were gone, their power was gone, and humanity stood alone in the ashes, victorious but forever changed. The universe was silent again, not the silence of peace, but the silence of fear, the kind of silence that comes when an old empire dies and something new is born from its shadow. Humanity had avenged its past, but in doing so, it had carved itself into legend, a legend written not with words, but with fire and blood. The war was over. The Council was gone. The great alliance that had once ruled the galaxy for thousands of years was nothing but dust and memories. But the silence that followed was not the peace so many had dreamed of. It was heavy, suffocating, a silence built on ruins and ghosts. The galaxy had changed forever, and in its heart one truth burned brighter than any star. Humanity had returned, and nothing would ever be the same again. Admiral Alina Reyes stood alone in the observation deck of the Remembrance, staring out at the remains of the Council's capital. Once it had been a beacon, a shining jewel of unity and order. Now it was a scarred wasteland, its cities reduced to ash, its monuments buried beneath the rubble. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, older, colder, and more tired than she remembered. Victory had come at a cost so high it was hard to tell if they had truly won anything at all. "Commander Hale," she said quietly as her second-in-command entered the room. "Status." "Complete," he replied. "Their fleets are gone, their leadership is dead, no organized resistance remains." "And the civilians?" "They survived," Hale said, lowering his eyes. "Billions are without homes, entire worlds are starving, the old trade networks are gone, the galaxy is broken." Reyes closed her eyes. It was the price of vengeance, a price they had always known they would pay. But hearing it aloud still felt like a blade twisting in her chest. In the days that followed, the human fleets began to withdraw. There were no speeches of conquest, no claims of dominion. They did not build colonies on the worlds they had destroyed. They did not plant their flags on conquered soil. Humanity did not want an empire, they wanted justice. And now that justice was done, they had no reason to stay. But the galaxy would not let them disappear so easily. Refugees from hundreds of species came to the humans, begging for help. Broken governments pleaded for guidance. Former enemies asked for alliances. The irony was not lost on Reyes. The very galaxy that had once called humanity primitive and barbaric was now looking to them for salvation. And yet humanity hesitated. "We came here to destroy," Reyes said during a war council. "We were never meant to rule." "But we can't just leave them like this," Hale argued. "Without the Council, everything will collapse. Trade, medicine, law, it's all gone. Billions will die." Reyes was silent for a long time. Then finally she nodded. Then maybe it's time to plant something new. What began as a whisper became a promise. Humanity, once erased from history, would not rebuild the old order, they would help create something better. They sent aid ships to starving worlds. They deployed engineers to rebuild shattered cities. They offered technology and medicine freely, without demands or conditions. And most importantly, they invited every surviving species, even former enemies, to sit at the table and decide their shared future. It was not an empire, it was not a council. It was something different, a fragile alliance built on scars and understanding. And at its heart was humanity, not as conquerors but as survivors. Months later, on a small hill overlooking the ruins of the old council chamber, Admiral Reyes placed a single object into the ground, a small plaque, simple and unadorned. On it were just 3 lines. Here ends an age of arrogance. Here begins an age of memory. We were ashes, now we are stars. She stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at her coat, the red sun dipping below the horizon. She thought of Earth, the blue world that had once been their home, now nothing but dust and legend. She thought of the billions who had died screaming under council fire. She thought of the centuries of exile and pain that had brought them to this moment. And then, for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to cry. Across the galaxy, stories spread, stories of the humans who had vanished into the dark and returned as vengeance incarnate. Stories of fleets that blotted out the stars. Stories of a people who had been erased from history but carved their name into it with fire. Some called them monsters, others called them saviors, but all agreed on one thing: humanity had changed the galaxy forever. And somewhere deep in the quiet void between the stars, a single message echoed. A message passed from ship to ship, world to world, heart to heart. We do not forgive, we do not forget, but we will help you build again. Years later, children on distant planets would learn about Earth, not as a forgotten footnote, but as the spark that reshaped the stars. They would speak the name human with a mix of fear and awe, respect and gratitude. The council was gone. A new age had begun. And in the heart of that new age, humanity stood not as conquerors or destroyers, but as a reminder. A reminder that even ashes can rise again.